The Business Roundtable and other advocates of free trade can point to the increase in exports of hogs, corn, and shoes to Mexico since the passage of NAFTA. In other words, the trade with Mexico is something that has saved farmers in Iowa. It has saved farmers in Kansas and Nebraska. It works for them. That same process, because corn farmers and hog farmers in Mexico are being ruined in the same process, means that more small farmers in Mexico will be separated from their place, and they will go north, where they will work in the hog farms of Iowa. The Border Patrol, which bases its budget requests on the number of apprehensions of illegals and drugs, will get more money and positions the more of them they catch. The militarization of the border will select out the useless immigrants in favor of the hardiest of the workers. When the immigrants do get across, some of them will send some money they earn back to wherever it is, Parral, Irapuato, where it will save families from calamity. It'll buttress marginal village economies, and one that nobody thinks about, it will take the heat off corrupt local and national Mexican governments. In the United States, meat packers, strawberry growers will have ready workers. Restaurants and hotels will be cleaned. Something I've pointed out and some people have finally acknowledged. You know, if you live in a place like California, to live in a neighborhood that professionals think they should live in, you need to have 2 jobs. How do you have kids? You have a niñera. You have a Mexican immigrant woman who takes care of the kids. Nobody has calculated the number of marriages that have been saved by the presence of undocumented Mexican niñeras. Minister
only U.S. law more complicated than immigration law is tax law. And I actually went looking for this board game, but I couldn't find it in time. But do you guys know the game Chutes and Ladders, where you have kind of like the path, and you spin the spinner, and maybe you end up on a ladder, maybe you end up in a chute. Well, that is exactly the way our immigration law works. Maybe you were lucky enough to get beat up by your American citizen husband. Well, great. In our system, that's a ladder. You can go right to the top. Okay? Maybe the guy that beat you up was not an American citizen. Well, maybe we can do something for you, but your ladder's probably not quite as high. There's just a million arbitrary things in our immigration law that function essentially like this game of Chutes and Ladders. And one sibling might land on a chute and go all the way down to the bottom, and the other sibling might have something happen to them that's a ladder, or they keep going. I think that's a function of where our immigration law came from. There has always been, the Bracero program was not something that I would.
So the annual budget of the U.S. Border Patrol stood at $3 billion in fiscal year 2009. That's a 9-fold increase since 1992 fiscal year. The number of Border Patrol agents stationed along the southwest border with Mexico grew to 17,000 in 2009. That's a 5-fold increase since 1992. The combined budgets of the U.S. Customs and Border Protection, that's the parent agency of the Border Patrol within the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, in charge of the interior enforcement, grew from $9.1 billion in 2003 to $17.2 billion in fiscal year 2010. The centerpiece of border enforcement is referred to as the Secure Border Initiative, launched by the Department of Homeland Security in 2005. This program calls for up to 2,000 miles of literal fencing of the U.S.-Mexican border and a virtual fence, sensors, radars, cameras, drones. That's called SBI Net. And it's supposed to alert the Border Patrol whenever an unauthorized border crossing occurs. Now, regarding the fencing, Lizzie, I won't put you on the spot yet in terms of your own observations about that. The REAL ID Act of 2005 authorized DHS, Homeland Security, to waive any and all legal requirements such as environmental laws that may stand in the way of fence construction. DHS exercised this authority in 2008 by waiving environmental and land management laws in 4 states, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. So hundreds of border fencing has been created, about 800 miles, as well as vehicle barriers. And we could talk for a long time, students might have gone to the border, about how ineffective that border fencing really is. Now people kind of go around it, and through it, push trucks through it, and all kinds of things. It's cost $2.4 billion, and there's really no evidence that it's enhancing border security or deterring unauthorized immigrants. We climb right over it. In fact, we sometimes see people climbing right over it. SBI Net has been plagued by technical problems, shoddy testing, missed deadlines ever since Boeing Corporation received $1 billion of a contract from DHS to build it. In fact, it's so bad in terms of the technical problems through the testing that DHS Secretary Napolitano froze all the funding pending a more comprehensive review. That happened in just a few months ago in March.
Until your green card comes through. And then when your green card comes through, you'll have proof of status. But you think a police officer from Maricopa County is going to understand what deferred action is? I think of my clients who have significant benefit parole. Guess where they got that? From the Drug Enforcement Agency. They're snitches. They're informants. You get pulled over, you think they can just pull out their DEA card showing that they're a witness for a federal prosecution against a drug lord? So status itself is an amorphous concept. There are easy ones, green cards, work permits, right? Those are easy ones. But it takes care of about 10% of the universe of what we call status from an immigration standpoint. So is the law not enforced because it doesn't make sense? Maybe, arguably. But more importantly, it's not enforced because there's no practical way to enforce it. And that brings me full circle to what I want to talk about from our perspective, and that is Colorado. So in Colorado in 2006, there was a lot of political movement to get tough on immigration. It was an election year. Republicans were coming out really strongly against immigration, and the Democrats said, we got to get tough on immigration. So there was a number of bills passed out of our state legislature, including one called SB 90. What SB 90 says is that if you get pulled over for anything more than a 5-point traffic offense, basically what that means is anything that requires a court appearance, okay, then the police officer, upon reasonable suspicion, is required to call immigration. Okay? But there's no lawsuit. Like, you can't sue a police officer if he fails to do his job. He's just required to call immigration. We've had that law since 2006, right? It already exists. So the question is, how does Arizona take it a step further? Well, first of all, it adds the civil remedy for private citizens to sue the police. But it also adds the other components. It makes it a state crime to fail to have proof of lawful status. So a previous speaker brought up the point of, the costs of this litigation and for that to be on the horizon. What does it mean to you and I? Well, the fact is that these laws do test the outer bounds of constitutionality. That's what they're there for. I mean, they're not shameless about it. Joe Arpaio has come out and blatantly said, I'm not going to follow. Napolitano's not my boss. I don't report to her. I'm not going to follow what she has to say.
Emphasis on going after the little guy in employer sanctions, but what we have seen is an increase in criminal prosecution of employers. I think the Obama administration is very actively interested in seeing immigration reform, and that includes Napolitano. The problem is that the political maneuvering to get that done. There are so many moving pieces. I was just reading today that an article about